your life, like when you're on stage as a comedian, it's sort of, you're dealing with a crowd, obviously you're feeding off a crowd, and writing is, a very solitary experience. How do you fluctuate between the two? How do you go back and forth, like that mindset?
I find it quite easy, actually. I think there's lots of similarities. When you're on stage, you're trying to get a laugh. What you're trying to do is you're trying to read the energy of the room, as you say, and you're also trying to, every laugh comes from discovery. So it has to be surprise to trigger a laugh. So you just move that discovery into crime, and you can kind of imagine the reader and know where their head will be at a particular time. And that's when you can use discovery and surprise. And instead of aiming for a laugh, you can aim for a, which is that's the strategy I use. I quite like doing the writing solitary because it is on my own. I get to pick something that I want to talk about. And I don't have to have contributions from other people while I'm doing it. And there's also more time and space in putting it down in words, where I have 80,000 words instead of a stand-up show is about 6,000 words that goes for an hour. So it kind of just gives you breathing room to really kind of dig into and tackle things. And the mood is different as well with stand-up. I mean, you have to keep the joke rate high, whereas with the book, you have to keep the tension high, and jokes break tension. That's what they're designed to do. And so it's kind of a balance. That's probably the hardest bit that I find to edit out, is when I do my edits. Often I need to look back and think of where I'm breaking the tension too much, and kind of pare it back, so that, because there's a little bit of black humor in this, but I need to make sure it's not overbearing.
Yeah. What attracted you to crime fiction in the first place? Like why are you writing crime?
I think it's just my favorite genre, is the boring answer, and I've always read it. But I think that crime novels, I think they're able to say so much. I think that a good crime novel is a character novel with a couple of dead bodies in it, rather than, a really kind of over the top kind of version of shoot 'em ups or whatever. That's kind of not what I generally like to read. But yeah, so I think I'm drawn to the genre because of what you can say. Because if you have a character that's thrown into something above their head, then they learn things about themselves. And you can also say a lot about the world. So as well as being a crime novel, Either Side of Midnight it's a whodunit, but it's also a why done it and a how done it. And I'm exploring even what murder really is, and how, crime novels kind of could evolve into all these different areas as well.
Absolutely. Do you have any sort of favorite crime writers, like anyone that influenced your writing in particular?
Yes, I love Peter Temple. The Broken Shore, I think, is probably the biggest influence on my writing. I really, really adore Scott Smith, who has only written a couple of books, but he's just so wild with genre and so inventive. And his book, A Simple Plan, I think really influenced me as well.
That's the one I read. Yeah,
yeah, it's fabulous. Yeah. It's so good. If you've watched Breaking Bad, they steal so much from A Simple Plan.
Absolutely.
Because it is so good.
Yeah.
And those are really that's a really kind of character driven, the plot is nothing special in a 2-line sentence, but he really makes it special.
Yeah.
So I really love both of them. I love Jane Harper is one of my favorites as well. I think she unlocked a lot of publishing opportunities for crime writers across Australia. So I genuinely believe that I wouldn't be published if Jane Harper hadn't published her books. And Stuart Turton is one of my new favorites. I think he's wildly inventive and does some really exceptional things that I could never do. It's a completely different space of crime writing, but it's a real ride. So I
haven't read his latest one yet that comes out, I think, later this year, but The Seven Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle was phenomenal. We did it for Crime Book Club here. I'm just trying to unpack and unpick that plot that sort of wraps around itself. It's just incredibly well done.
Yeah, it's clever, it's funny, his voice, his settings, his ideas, they're so big, and I think he really pulls it off quite nicely.
It's funny you mentioned Jane Harper too, and I always remember when I was sort of starting out wanting to work in publishing and sitting down with the publisher, and they asked what I like to read, and I think they asked a big gigantic question like, if I could publish anything, what would it be? And I said it's Australian crime fiction, because I think at the time there was really only sort of Peter Chorus and John Cleary, and obviously you had Peter Temple, who was sort of held up in a different light, almost he wasn't a crime writer, even though he was, but, he was sort of seen as above that. And it's so funny or amazing how now, years later, Jane Harper sort of did unlock these doors, and now we have such a incredible amount, an avalanche of, brilliant Australian crime fiction, and some of it's just fantastic. It's amazing what she did and how the Dry sort of, did that for crime fiction.
Yeah, I mean, I was the same about, when did I start in publishing? 6-7 years ago. I was sitting down in job interviews and, they'd say, what do you like to read? And I'd say crime fiction. And what have you read most recently? And I'd say these books. And you could tell that they were all thinking, doesn't sell, it's not really a big part of our list, and that my interests maybe weren't aligned with the market at that time. Yeah. So I was so excited when it's not even as an author, just I'm so excited that it's exploded and there's so many opportunities for so many Aussie crime writers these days.
And I think we're at that place now where, you get through that stage where people are maybe trying to replicate Jane Harper, and now there's sort of different flavor of crime fiction. Different writers write, Australian writers write different kinds of crime fiction. Like you've got Candice Fox, obviously, who writes, I think, a very specific brand of crime fiction. Your books too, Chris Hammer. I think it's amazing. Just how the breadth of Australian crime fiction right now is incredible.
Yeah, I think what sets us apart from the rest of the world is, to be perfectly honest, and this sounds a bit indulgent, but sentence level writing from Australian crime writers, I think, is just that notch up on international suspense novelists.
Yeah.
Because everyone just puts together such good sentences at a prose level. But you're right. I mean, the people, crime is such a generous genre. You can spread it across the board. I really try and push unique elements, big hooks, and thoughtful explorations of kind of the actual genesis or the kind of place that murder has in our society. And I think that's hopefully what differentiates me in terms of the modernity of my books. The first one being reflective of things like Making a Murderer, and the second one more being reflective of these newer cases. So yeah, that's kind of where I try and find distinction. But it's interesting. Everyone has their own little niche and slots in quite nicely alongside everyone else.
Yeah, so you're a writer, you're a comedian, and you also work at Curtis Brown Australia. What is it like? Do you learn a lot from working with these amazing writers who you sort of deal with day in and day out? Do you sort of, when you're looking at their manuscripts, whatever, when you're sort of talking to them, do you sort of learn things from them, or not necessarily get ideas up from them, obviously, but like maybe their writing processes or their methods or the way they think about stories? Do you sort of take anything that they ever tell you,
I think I learn something every day from our wonderful writers. I think I'm very scared of absorbing by osmosis plot points and stuff. So I'm hyper aware of that, but the same way as I am when I sit up the back of a comedy club and watch other people stand up. So I am very aware of that. I feel certain level of professional jealousy at how fast some of them write. I'm a very slow writer, and suddenly manuscripts fly across my desk and I'm like, what? I only wrote one chapter in the time that entire novel came together. But I think it's interesting because crime and thriller have a certain set of rules. And what I really like to see is I like when each individual author, I think, breaks those rules in different ways to the benefits of their novels, because they're so good at what they do that they're able to push the envelope. And it's interesting seeing that the little differences between how each person interprets the rules of crime writing and what they can kind of bring to the table.
When you're writing, obviously you have to read manuscripts for a living too, but do you ever find you sort of, just by osmosis, you sort of inhale the stylistic trends of any writers you're reading, and then when you go back to start writing your own book again, do you find that anything you've read sort of, like I often find I read a lot of Elmore Leonard, sometimes I go back to him, Lawrence Block, and they have a very specific style. And when I'm writing something, I have to be very careful that I don't suddenly start emulating what I've been reading. And, I read 2 or 3 books a week, and I have to be very conscious and very self-aware that, to separate what I read from what I write. Do you have an issue sort of differentiating that, or are you very much, when you sit down to write, it's just you, it's pure, Benjamin Stevenson coming out on the page?
It is difficult. I don't think I absorb from any one particular source while I'm writing now. I think when I wrote my first book, you know, maybe I was still kind of finding my voice or leaning into my influences and thinking about the overarching genre and space and market and trying to kind of fit. But certainly now that I'm writing my third one, I feel a lot of confidence in my voice and my tone and what I can do with it. There are certain things that influence my voice in a way that has stuck around. There's certain, so there's certain pieces of individual elements that I think have become part of my voice, and that I've kind of very small pieces that I've loved, that I kind of try and bring the energy to my work. One of the things that I do when I write my finales, for example, is I listen to the Hello Zepp, which is the orchestral score from the end of the first Saw movie.
Interesting. Okay.
And it's when the movie flashes back through everything and reveals the killer. And it's a really dramatic score, and it kind of gets me in a really cool headspace. And not even that my books are horrific like those movies are. They're not horrors, and they're not even in the same space. But I love the feeling that that music gives you when it rifles through everything you've seen and reveals the ending. And so that's one of the things, that's a feeling that I think that I've put into my voice and in my books, is that my final chapter kind of goes with that music, hopefully quite well.
Do you listen to music when you write in general, or is it just that final, that conclusion?
I'm a bit of everything. I do like to block things out with music, but sometimes I can get distracted if it's too lyric heavy, or I need to listen to something that I've heard 1,000 times that I'm not thinking about. So I kind of spice it up. I often listen to the Hamilton soundtrack.
Sure, yeah.
I like certain orchestra scores that, like I said, have particular moods. There's the other one I do when I'm writing dramatic scenes is I like to listen to the theme from Requiem for a Dream, which is, you'd recognize it from every action movie trailer ever, because it just pumps to big scenes. And otherwise, I tried actually just last night. I was really struggling with it. I was listening to the charts on Spotify or something. And there were too many songs that I hadn't heard, and they were getting in my ear, and Cardi B was yelling at me, and it was too much. So I listened to Thunderstorms, which I thought was actually quite relaxing. Yeah. So I'm a bit of everything.
Whenever I'm reading and there's noise outside or whatever, I put in my headphones and listen to thunderstorms or rain on a tin roof or whatever. It just gets me in a zone to, read uninterrupted for half an hour, 45 minutes. I can imagine when you're writing as well. Yeah, that can sort of blur out the rest of the world.
It's a new, genuinely, I just tried it last night, but I like it. So I'm sticking with that answer.
Yeah. So I suppose to wrap up, what's life like as an author releasing a book in sort of this COVID-19 world? Are you sort of doing a lot of online events for Either Side of Midnight?
Yeah, I think I've got quite a bunch of library talks with the fantastic Carl Perry and Catherine Firkin coming up. So I'll do a few of those. I think it's challenging, and 6 months ago when, COVID kind of started and everyone kind of went, oh, what's the landscape going to be like? It was quite scary, but I've grown to be optimistic. I think I can reach a lot of people in a lot of unique ways that maybe I couldn't have reached before. And hopefully people are looking for a bit of escape from their day of, if they're locked down or self-isolating. And so hopefully they turn to books, which I think is all, I'm optimistic about it, and I'm excited to put it out there.
Well, we wish you all the best, and can't wait to put Either Side of Midnight in our readers' hands at Potts Point Bookshop. Thanks for joining us, Ben.
Thanks, Simon. Nice to talk to you.
You too.